The injury news continues to pile up for Notre Dame right now, especially on the Irish defense. Notre Dame has really been hit hard by the injury bug here in 2024. First, it started with the offensive line. Now it is really eating up the defense. And the latest is a big one, and that's what I'm going to talk about in this show right now. Notre Dame head coach Marcus Freeman announced today during the press conference that Benjamin Morrison, star cornerback Benjamin Morrison, injured his hip on Saturday. We don't know the details of it. I don't remember when it happened. I don't know where it happened. I don't know if it happened during the game or not. But he announced that he is injured his hip and he is having surgery and that his season is over. This is a huge, huge, huge blow for Notre Dame. I know there's been a lot of talk about what kind of season Benjamin Morrison is having, and is he playing up to expectations and all these type of things. But if you take away expectations and you take away what you thought he could be, what he should be, or anything else like that, Benjamin Morrison still had a pretty darn good season, and he's still a very good cornerback, and he's been a good cornerback for Notre Dame. He was very good in the Texas A&M game. He was very good for the most part in the Louisville game. He was very, very good in this game against Stanford, and I thought was really starting to kind of round into form in this game. And Stanford completely avoided Benjamin Morrison in this game, and for good reason, because his coverage was outstanding. The one penalty he was called for, I thought, was a bad penalty. He was very good against Miami of Ohio. He's had a good season. And the thing about the last couple games, he's been much better in force against the run game. There's a couple of those perimeter runs that Stanford had this weekend that Benjamin did a really nice job of coming up, taking on sort of the perimeter blocker and making sure that those runs got forced back inside. So he's been playing good football. Has he been playing like a first-round draft pick? That's debatable. So the debate is the level of how good he's been, but he's been good, and at times very good this season. And when you lose a player like that, it is damaging to your defense, especially when you consider how much Notre Dame builds its entire defensive structure and philosophy around the ability to cover and play man cover, to have an elite pass defense, which then frees up the linebackers and the front players to really attack downhill and be disruptive. So this is a huge, huge blow for Notre Dame in this not only this upcoming game against Georgia Tech, who has a very good receiving core, but it's obviously going to be a problem down the road for other matchups, the Virginia matchups with Malachi Fields and that group. It's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a challenge even against Florida State to a degree, and then of course USC. And if Notre Dame is able to run the table and not suffer any injuries, it's certainly going to be a problem when you get into the postseason. You start thinking about playing teams like Texas and Ohio State and teams like that. Maybe get Bama with Ryan Williams, and you don't have Benjamin Morrison. That's a blow. And I know what the counter's going to be. Well, you've got Leonard Moore. I understand all that, but you're even better when you've got Christian Gray, Leonard Moore, and Benjamin Morrison to go at teams. And it certainly certainly depletes the depth quite a bit for Notre Dame. So let's just talk about sort of what's next. I'm going to talk about some issues that they have, and some questions about what does this mean for Notre Dame. And so the first one is who steps in now? Now that Benjamin Morrison's out, who steps in? And that's going to be the first thing we talk about. Then I'll discuss just some of the other aspects of this. So when you talk about what Notre Dame has to do now, it's, you got to reload. You've got to replace and reload. That's essentially where they're at. They can't afford to, feel sorry for themselves. We can, as fans, can kind of sit back and grumble about it. But, with Mike Mickens and Al Golden and the rest of the team, it's like, all right, okay, Benjamin's out. There's nothing we can do to fix that. So what do we do now? Let's go out and figure this out. And that's what Notre Dame is going to have to do. And the decision is relatively easy. It's the same decision that you had when Christian Gray went down. Notre Dame moved Leonard Moore into the starting lineup, and I thought Leonard played very well against Louisville, which is probably the best pass offense he's going to face all season in the regular season. Now, perhaps USC, when we get to that game in November, could be tougher, but I would go with Louisville being the toughest test that Notre Dame is going to face this season in the pass game when you consider the talent at quarterback plus the talent at wide receiver for them. When Christian Gray went down, Leonard Moore slid into that field cornerback position. And I know one of the questions that I've already seen posed at Irish Breakdown, and it's a fair question, was, do you move Christian Gray into the boundary and then slide Leonard Moore into the field position? There'd been a lot of talk in the past about how Christian Gray would take over for Benjamin Morrison when he leaves. And I don't that could still happen next season. But this is going to be a situation where Leonard Moore is going to slide into Benjamin Morrison's spot, is what I believe is going to happen. The reason I believe that to be true is because they had to move Leonard Moore to a different spot when Christian Gray went down. Prior to that moment, Leonard Moore had been playing boundary since he got to Notre Dame. And, this is a situation where you lose a player like Benjamin Morrison. You better hope you've got somebody really good to step into the starting lineup. And fortunately for Notre Dame, they do. If you all remember when Notre Dame landed Leonard Moore, we were very high on Leonard Moore, just like we were high on Benjamin Morrison. He was banged up his senior year, and so he couldn't get that rankings bump from us or anybody else because of that injury. But this is an incredibly talented football player. He's long, he's fast, he's up to over 190 pounds, so he's put on a lot of good weight at Notre Dame. And he more than held his own against a very good Louisville receiving corps. Made some big plays in that game, as you know, had that big forced fumble, was very good in coverage. And when they did beat him, a couple times they did beat him, it required perfect balls and great catches to beat him. So, and he's going to only get better and better and better. He is a ideal boundary type of player. Now, the thing I love about Leonard Moore is I do think he can play both at a high level. We saw that against Louisville. But against Louisville, he had really been thrust into that role, which he hadn't practiced a lot all year. And playing to that field position is different than playing boundary. It's a lot more space to cover, a lot of different type of routes that you're going to attack. It's just there's a lot of differences between that when you're someone who's been practicing the boundary all the time. Now he's going to play in his more natural boundary position, which is a spot that he has an ideal skill set for. As I mentioned, he's 6'2", has very long arms. He's a pretty smooth athlete. He's obviously longer than Benjamin Morrison, and I don't know if he's quite as explosive with his turns as Benjamin, but he's fast and he's long. And so I think if there is any loss there from a transition speed when opening up in man coverage, that can be made up for, in my opinion, with his length and with his just raw speed, which you saw against Louisville on multiple occasions. This kid can really, really fly. He's also a very smart football player, very heady football player. He's picked up the Irish defense pretty well. And being a boundary player, there's some force, run responsibility there, and I think he'll be able to handle that just fine as well. He's a pretty strong kid, and he was a pretty solid run defender in high school as well. So I think he'll make a smooth transition there. We've obviously seen him playing some boundary corner so far this season, but he obviously got his big break playing that field spot. So I do expect Leonard to step into that role and be that boundary player for Notre Dame and take over that role by Benjamin Morrison. And now the concern is, okay, what's your depth look like? Because this is now your third really loss at corner. It began in fall camp when Chance Tucker tore his knee up. Chance is out for the year. Saw him on Saturday. He still has his knee in a brace. He's still on crutches. I mean, his season is without question over with at this point in time. And then obviously Jaden Mickey quit the team a couple weeks back before the Louisville game, decided he wanted to go do his own thing and do what's best for him, despite what it would mean for his teammates. And now you're in a situation where your depth chart has been completely depleted with the injuries and then the decision by Jaden Mickey to leave the team. I know people have asked, do you try to convince Jaden Mickey to come back? I'll just address that real quick. I would not. Jaden made a decision that he felt was best for him. You guys know my stance on players leaving in the middle of the season. I don't like it, but it is what it is. I would not bring him back for a number of reasons. He decided to leave the team. Just because you're in a tough situation, you don't beg him to come back. You roll with the guys that want to be here. I also feel like the next guy on the depth chart is Carson Hobbs. What message does that send to Carson Hobbs? Hey, yeah, you're a freshman, but you've been here since the summer. You worked your butt off. You've had the right attitude. You didn't, quit the team when things weren't going in your direction or well for you. You didn't leave the team when, you thought you were going to get into a game and you didn't get into the game and all those type of things. He's stuck with it. He's battling. He's staying with it. What does it say to him if you're going to bring a kid back who quit the team and then thrust him into the lineup? So I would not do that. Maybe if there's a situation where it said, okay, hey, we'll bring you back, but we're not going to play you for the first couple of weeks and you're going to be the number 4 corner, maybe. But I highly doubt that that's something that Jaden Mickey would want to do, and that's something that I wouldn't want to do if I'm Notre Dame. So when you talk about what's next, depth is a major problem. You've got Carson Hobbs is going to have to get ready to go. Now, I don't know that Carson Hobbs was a guy that necessarily you expected to play a bunch as a freshman, but here we are, and he's going to have to play. Carson's also a talented player, tall, strong, fast, just like Leonard Moore. He's played a lot of nickel this year. He's played a field corner this year. I don't know what happens next if Leonard Moore needs time off. This is where it gets a little tricky, and I don't have answers for what Notre Dame would do. Do you have Carson Hobbs cross-train at field and boundary, and he's sort of the next man in? Do you have situations where maybe you go to where you put Carson Hobbs in at field and you let Christian Gray play a little bit of both? He's the starting field, and then maybe he can give you 10, 12 snaps in a relief of Leonard Moore, so Leonard Moore can get a breather, and then obviously Carson Hobbs can take some of those snaps when Christian needs a breather. The other options are Notre Dame could ramp up its base defense. So Notre Dame has been a very heavy 4-2-5 defense this year with nickel personnel, with Jordan Clark playing the nickel. Jordan Clark is also someone who is going to be able to play a little bit of corner. The problem is if you take him away from that position and you put him at that field cornerback position, you now don't have a nickel because your next nickel is Carson Hobbs, who is, again, a freshman. So can Max Hurleman play that position if Jordan Clark has to play out there? Or does Notre Dame ramp things up and say, hey, we're going to go with our nickel defense now? So that leaves them in some really tough spots with some decisions that they have to make here at that position. The other thing, too, is you could also cross-train Rod Hurd to play some of the nickel if Jordan Clark is going to play some of the corner, but then that leaves you thinner at safety. That means you now have to maybe activate a Luke Talich. It means you may have to activate a Kennedy Urlacher. You may have to activate a Ben Minnick, or maybe a Don Schuler and Xavier Watts have to play more snaps. There's a chain of events that's going to happen because of this that's going to impact the rest of the secondary. You have to, because you only have 3 scholarship corners. And if you have another injury, if somebody doesn't play effectively, you have to have answers. Christian Gray's already missed a game with an injury. Leonard Moore was banged up last year as a senior in high school. You can't just assume you're going to be okay. You have to have further contingency plans, and none of those are great plans. But if you do go to a little bit more of ramp up your base defense, maybe that means Jack Kaiser goes back out and plays a little bit more rover. Maybe there's now a role for Jaden Alsbury out there, who played some nickel this spring, nickel type position this spring. Maybe you see maybe more of Jalen Sneed in that role. So they're going to have to figure some things out and find some answers at that position. There's no question about it. And what will that be? It's going to depend on how well Jordan Clark can handle both spots, how well Carson Hobbs can handle both spots. Can Max Hurleman, who moved from running back to cornerback, who's now the starting punt returner, can he handle that position? Can Rod Hurd cross-train, which is a bummer because he's just now starting to get comfortable at safety. Now you got to put more on his plate. So this is not a hey, they're going to be perfectly fine situation. The pass defense could still be very good, and I expect it to still be very good, but you are now in a position where you are now an injury away at a lot of spots from being in a lot of trouble. And this is just the latest for Notre Dame. And I do have to ask the question, how will this impact Notre Dame's coverage structure with Leonard Moore? You're a heavy man coverage team, as much as any team in the country. Do you continue doing that with Leonard Moore? Do you mix it up a little bit and maybe play some off coverage? Mix up your zone coverage a little bit more? What are some of the different wrinkles that you can do if you have to protect your younger players? That's something they have to consider. Now, you can still go into a game saying, hey, man defense, that's who we are. We're going to play it. But if you're struggling at it, or if you're in a matchup where you don't want to leave Leonard Moore on an island all game against somebody in the postseason, a Texas receiver, an Ohio State receiver, you have to have some answers. And so it's going to be imperative that Al Golden and Mike Mickens come up with some of those answers. And what will those answers be? Because right now, Notre Dame's pass defense has been elite this season. Can it remain elite? If it's just very good and not elite, what does that do to the overall structure of the defense? These are a lot of questions that we don't know answers to, but they're going to have to be addressed by Notre Dame with decisions they make personnel-wise, changes they make structurally, but then, of course, we'll know if those things work by what they do on Saturday. So this is certainly a big thing. And then I have to ask the question, too, what's the breaking point for this defense when it comes to injuries? Obviously, you lost Jordan Patojo. He's out. Boubacar Traore's out. You've got Benjamin Morrison is out. Gabriel Rubio's back, but he hasn't been able to stay healthy the last couple of years. Jason Onye's out right now. We don't know when he's going to come back. There's a breaking point that every team has where you've just lost too much. What is that? And Notre Dame's only halfway through the season. Can they stay healthy, relatively healthy from now through the end of the year? That's a major question mark. And And we'll have some conversations about, why is this happening down the road. I want to focus right now on just this specific situation right here. And then the final piece is, what does this mean for Benjamin Morrison? Benjamin's a true junior, so you don't have to worry about medical red shirts. Right now, he's having a good junior season, pretty good junior season, not an elite junior season. He's a guy that was always going to need to test well. There was always going to be questions about what is his speed like. And with the way he's played this year, which is good, but not great, with the injury, which is now the second injury, and a hip injury is very concerning, and a shoulder injury, you have to start thinking about, with NIL being a factor here, is there enough incentive for Benjamin Morrison to come back next year and play his senior season at Notre Dame? And while it's disappointing for this season, the potential of having Benjamin Morrison back next year, getting his shoulder right, getting his hip right, coming back next season with now a junior Christian Gray, a sophomore Leonard Moore, a sophomore Carson Hobbs, plus the incoming freshman class, all of a sudden Notre Dame's going to go from really thin at corner to incredibly, incredibly deep next year at cornerback, and then setting themselves up for the future. So Benjamin's going to have some decisions to make as well, and a lot of it's going to go based on how the recovery is going and the feedback he's getting from NFL teams. But I pretty much assumed he was going to be gone and be a first or second round draft pick after the season. But with the two injuries now, the shoulder and now the hip, if you were asking me my prediction would be is that when it's all said and done, he's going to be set to return next year to Notre Dame and get right back at it with Christian Gray. And then what do you do with the rest of your cornerback depth? Is maybe that going to help you go find your nickel answers instead of going to the portal again? Maybe now it's one of your young corners that's going to play a bunch, who proves himself. Going to be a lot of dominoes that are going to be falling because of this injury, and Notre Dame's going to have to be able to kind of handle it all and react to it and find some answers. And of course, guys are going to have to step up. So far, guys have stepped up. Boubacar or Jordan Patel goes down, Boubacar steps up, right? I mean, Boubacar goes down, Josh Burnham comes back, he steps up. Junior Tuihalamaka steps up. Bryce Young steps up. Christian Gray goes down, Leonard Moore steps up. Now, Leonard Moore is going to have to step up again. But so far, this defense has been able to handle all these injuries. But we are getting to the point now where you have to ask yourself, how much more of this can they take? And then in the offseason, Marcus Freeman's going to have to find out. They're going to have to really dive deep into every aspect of their strength program, their training program, their stretch program. All of this is going to have to be addressed to figure out, is this just bad luck? Is there something we're doing wrong from a strength program? Is there something we're doing wrong from a practice program? Do we need to improve our stretching program? Is it just bad luck in certain instances? There's a whole lot of things they're going to have to figure out to try their best to make sure that something like this doesn't happen again. Because yes, they have great depth, but no matter how great your depth is, at some point in time, you're going to reach your breaking point. Hopefully Notre Dame hasn't reached that yet. And hopefully Leonard Moore and Carson Hobbs and the rest of the secondary is going to be able to step up and play at a level that Notre Dame's not able to miss a beat, just like Benjamin did when he was a freshman and stepped into the lineup, and his game really took off sort of middle to second half of the season. And hopefully Leonard Moore can have that. And then Christian Gray getting back, shaking that rust off. His game is going to continue to improve. And hopefully this defense is able to keep rocking and rolling, because it's been an elite defense so far. But you just lost one of your best players and one of the best corners in the country. And that's never an easy thing to overcome. It can be overcome, but it's not easy. And Notre Dame's going to have to find those answers. And I think one answer also, as we wrap up, is going to be the offense. It is now imperative the Notre Dame offense really improve their game, because you can't just assume that this defense is going to be able to hold every opponent to 7 to 13 points the rest of the way. You're going to have to be able to score more points early, and really help your defense out. So if there is a game or two down the stretch, if there is a game or two in the postseason where your defense is having a tougher time really locking a team down because your best pass rusher is out for the year in Traore, your best cornerback is out for the year in Benjamin Morrison, that you're going to be able to say, hey, listen, we got you today. You guys have carried us enough. We got you today. We can go out there and score a bunch on this team and help you guys out. My hope is that that's what Notre Dame is able to do, and that's what they're able to accomplish. And if they can, then I think this football team is going to have a chance to be very, very good the remainder of the season. And this could have a huge impact on this team next season if this does lead to Benjamin Morrison coming back, getting healthy, and putting a really, really, really elite secondary on the field. Again, next season. So that's where we're at. We're going to find out what Notre Dame does, and obviously they're going to get a big test this weekend. Georgia Tech has a very good secondary. They're going to go on the road. So we're going to find out right away how well this secondary is prepared to handle the challenge of losing Benjamin Morrison. Folks, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review. We'd greatly appreciate that. And as always, make sure you sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. We'll talk to you again very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.